This module of your overclock training is a brief video walkthrough of the UEFI environment or BIOS. After you press F2, that'll put you right on the main menu, which gives you access to date and time settings, as well as a view of what's attached to various drive ports on the system, both in NVMe and SATA ports. Any drives that are attached will show on these submenus. The only settings adjustable on this screen are the date and time. Moving along to the advanced chipset control menu, here you have access to Bluetooth, wireless LAN, function keys, GPU performance scaling, a variety of different settings that you can enable and disable. I like to turn off the boot logo, so I'm going to do that. Here you have the custom fan control enable and disable switch. This allows FN+1 and the manual fan controls and control center to work. On the ACPI settings menu, here you can enable or disable ACPI, hibernation, and sleep states. I like them disabled, so I just did that. The overclocking performance menu is exactly what it sounds like. Here you can disable or enable the overclocking feature. The VBoost feature is related to integrated graphics, so you'll want to leave that alone. On the processor menu is where you set your maximum overclock ratio, voltage, that type of thing. The memory menu gives you access to memory timings and speeds, so that you can, or access to XMP profiles. You have access to ring ratio and voltage, Encore voltage offset, and the CPU VR settings has to do with your amps, watts, and voltage regulator limits. On these submenus, you can enable and disable controls. Disabled is default, and anywhere you see 0, that's a default as well. So if you have anything set to disabled or 0 in terms of overclocking, you're generally going to have system defaults. So moving right along, you can enable and disable the smart feature on your hard drives or SSDs. The default setting is disabled. You can choose whether to enable or disable that. On the CPU configuration menu is where we will find access to multipliers, uh, power limits, C states, drive encryption, um, virtualization. You can toggle speed shift, speed step, turbo mode. A number of these settings are related to overclocking. Most of them relate in one way or another to CPU performance, if not overclocking directly. We'll cover all of this in detail during your one-on-one personalized overclock training. If you notice in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a legend that gives you a brief description of what is represented on the menu that you're accessing. Sometimes that's helpful, sometimes it's not. When you see a triangle, if you hit your enter key, it'll open it up, and here we have the platform miscellaneous configuration menu. Nothing here relates to overclocking, so nothing that we'll cover in training. The SATA configuration menu is where you set your drives to use AHCI or RAID. You can also tell the system whether you have an SSD or hard drive attached to the port. The acoustic management menu is only for mechanical hard drives. It does not work for SSD drives. It allows you to tone down the drives and make them quieter. You can disable or enable network stack configuration. CSM configuration has to do with legacy support for Windows 7 and older operating systems, including DOS booting. USB configuration gives you a few options to adjust, primarily for legacy support on USB. The info report configuration tells the system how long to wait for you to read things on your screen, or you can turn off reports altogether. The Thunderbolt menu gives you access to a variety of settings, obviously related to the Thunderbolt port. On the chipset menu, we have options that we really don't need to get into. All of the defaults I would recommend leaving. They have to do with graphics card and PCIe Express slots, that type of thing. Um, you can really cause some problems if you set wrong settings on these menus. And the best approach to handling BIOS settings is if you don't know what they do, don't change them. It's a good way to get into trouble. So that's what I would advocate at this point. It's very difficult to find any information on some of these settings. You can Google if you'd like, but many of these settings do not have any kind of supporting documentation. Security menu allows you to turn the trusted platform module on and off or set a password at boot. If you're not using drive encryption, you don't need the trusted platform module, so you can disable that if you wish. The boot menu allows you to tell the system how long for you to wait to press F2, whether you want numlock on at boot. You can set your drive priorities. The OS selection menu is where you choose whether you're going to use UEFI boot or legacy with CSM. If you're running Windows 7, you'll want UEFI boot disabled and you'll want CSM support enabled. Typically on the CSM menu, you'll want to use legacy video. The exit menu allows you to save your changes. You can also manually launch another bootable drive if it's attached by scrolling down. Instead of selecting Windows Boot Manager, for example, you could select a USB drive. And there we have it, all done in less than 7 minutes.